This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. I'm in Seattle again today for this episode of the podcast. Burke-Gilman Brewing. You guys had an amazing year last year with this doubleheader of Alpha King and winning a gold medal at GABF and Imperial Hazy and Juicy. We're going to talk about the way that you brew hoppy beers. We've got Kenneth Trease, Director of Brewing Operations. We've got Phil Pesheck, head brewer, and we've got Julia Astrid Davis, brewer. And, so it's a big group of Burke-Gilman brewers here for the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
After watching that kind of back-to-back, thing happen between Alpha King and GABF, we all started asking that question, who's Burke-Gilman Brewing? and so I would love to answer that question through the course of this podcast and also kind of dig deeper into what you all are doing that is producing that kind of success and such compelling beers that are, out there and making waves amongst some pretty difficult competition and some pretty amazing brewers. We're going to get into all of that, but first, as the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling, G&D Chillers has set the standard on quality, service, reliability, and dedication to their customers' craft. New this year, redundancy meets efficiency. G&D's micro-channel condensers are built with all aluminum construction, which eliminates galvanic corrosion. Using half the refrigerant of conventional condensers with fewer brazed connections translates to a lower GWP and less opportunity for leaks. Call G&D Chillers today to discuss your project or reach out directly at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by Rahr North Star Pils, a new base malt to set your compass by. Rahr North Star Pils is crafted for brewers looking for a domestic Pilsner malt with low color and low modification. North Star Pils carries overtones of honey and sweetbread, supported by flavors and aromas of hay and a nutty character. It's suitable for any beer style, but particularly craft brewed versions of classic lagers. Let Rahr North Star Pils guide your craft by visiting bsgcraftbrewing.com or contact them at 1-800-374-2739. And that actually reminded me, the other thing that we should also talk about are lagers, because clearly you are IPA in the streets and lager in the sheets, according to this phrase that you put out there. And, as Kate Bernat has been working on writing a story about you for the magazine, she brought that up. And that was a particular note for her. She said, "Can we name the story this?"
We would love that.
Yeah. So give me the thumbnail sketch of Burke-Gilman history.
So I and a group of friends who've known each other since high school, a long time, found that we were all into craft beer. We were into the Seattle beer scene. We had been going to great local places like Big Time Brewing on the University Avenue for a long time. In the mid 2010s, I guess like 2016 or so, in our neighborhood, a really nice place opened called Ravenna Brewing. We found ourselves going there all the time. And it was, for us, a new model. Like, I had homebrewed in the 90s, a little bit in the 2010s or in the 2000s. And people would always say, "Oh, are you gonna open your own brewery?" And to me, a brewery was always like a factory in a warehouse district. And I was like, that doesn't appeal to me. I don't really want to do that. Or it was a brew pub with a restaurant. And I was like, I don't want to make pizzas. I don't know how. I don't want to run a restaurant.
Right.
But this new model of which Washington legalized a few years back, of have a brewery with a tap room, which is, for all intents and purposes, a bar without having to jump through all of the legal hoops that a bar has to jump through.
Right.
You can make beer. You can have a food truck. You don't have to worry about food yourself. You can have families there. I had young kids myself, and I found this is a lot of fun. And so my friends and I looked at each other and said, "You can do this? I didn't know you could do this. This is really cool. Could we do this?" And so we started in with the spreadsheets and the research. And after a couple of years, we sort of had kind of like a gut check, like, okay, this is about what we think it's going to cost. This is what we're going to do. Who's in, who's out. The people who stayed in, of course, it cost way more than we thought it was going to cost.
Sure, of course.
It took way longer than we thought it was going to take. In that group of 4 friends, I and another guy named Ty Ovendale were the brewers. We were the people who had done extensive home brewing. And our initial idea was, we'll be the brewers. And you guys, Eric and Corey, you run the tap room. And how hard could this be, right? At some point...
Famous last words.
Yes. At some point, fortunately, some spouses stepped in and said, so you're going to be away, both Saturday and Sunday, every weekend brewing? Is that what you're going to do? Because you're going to keep your day job? And it occurred to us, we could hire a brewer. Why don't we put up an ad? We could hire a brewer. And then we sort of redid the numbers and put up an ad, interviewed, I don't know, probably 10 people. And one of them was Mr. Pesheck here. One of them was Phil. And we were really impressed with his openness to experimentation, with his attitude, with his willingness to make the kinds of things we wanted to make. We found that I would get interviewed by journalists all the time saying, hey, there's a new brewery on the scene. What's your specialty? What are you going to do? And they're really expecting an answer like, we're going to do IPAs, or we're going to do sours, or we're going to do, whatever. And we didn't have a great answer other than we just like beer. We want to make everything, right? Which is not an answer that an article gets written about. Like, there's a new generalist brewery.
Right.
And honestly, I don't want to put words in Phil's mouth, but I think that he came in with the opinion that, we should make IPAs because IPAs are the best and IPAs sell and hops are awesome. And we don't disagree. We love IPAs.
Right.
But we also asked him, look, I don't want to be one of those places with 8 IPAs and a wheat beer on, right? I want to be a place that has some variety. We like all kinds of beer. Let's research this. And the number of times I said, hey, I just read this interesting article in this magazine I subscribe to. What about this style of beer? And Phil saying, I don't even know what that is. How can we brew that? I don't know. All right, I'll do some research. And then we would make a version, and it was decent. And then we'd make a second version, kind of having tried to fix what we learned from the first version. And it was pretty good. And so that's how we grew. And so, we have our little catchphrase about IPAs and lagers. But I mean, we've also recently we had 4 or 5 different Belgian Abbey ales on. We like to do all kinds of interesting stuff. At some point, like for a while, I mean, our sales here just in the tap room, because we don't distribute a lot, were of a level where Phil could pretty easily, I don't want to say easily, he worked hard, but he could handle it himself.
Right.
After we won the award, we sort of looked at each other and said, maybe it's time for that intern. Maybe it's time for that cellar person. And then I was talking to my partners and I was like, well, what if we didn't just hire a cellar person? What if we hired another brewer? Like, could we add to our repertoire, right? Like Phil has obviously proved himself with hops. Can we add someone who doesn't like hops and wants to do something else, right? And so we did that search, and along came Julia, who was very open, and I thought it took some bravery to say, I'm actually not all that into IPAs. I'm like, really? You came and interviewed at the Alpha King winning brewery, and you were willing to say that? Tell me more. That's some confidence. And so she's come along and sort of added a different dimension to what Phil gives us, and layered on top of that was the pandemic, where
Sure.
Our sales were cut by like 2/3 for a little while there until we figured out some other stuff. But here we are, starting to open back up again, and I'm really excited about the possibilities that having Phil on staff gives us with exploring different hop combos, the possibilities that having Julia on staff gives us with exploring, I want to say everything else. Obviously, you're not responsible for every single other thing, but
sure.
Being able to come and say, I want to brew this lager, I want to brew this other thing that's not a hoppy beer, and Phil stepping away and saying, great, you do that one, I'll do this one. Let me know when you need help, that sort of thing.
Yeah. What's the beer development process look like for you all? It seems like it's, both individual and collaborative, and ideas come to the table and then you work through and you iterate them and maybe work together on them. Talk to me a little bit about how that process looks for you all.
It's chaos.
Chaos.
It's organizing chaos. We have a 500 square foot brew house and a limited floor space. I have enough space on the floor for, 90 bags of malt, and things go wrong and you have to scratch a brew, and then you just have to make the best of things.
It's a small system here, and you've got a tap room here that's kind of in a walkout ground level, but kind of basement of another building.
Yes.
And so it's very much tucked in here and also built in a way to kind of maximize customer space more so than brew house space. But from a creative perspective, like, how do new ideas and new beers, come to the table, and how do you guys work through those ideas?
I spend a lot of time just looking at what's working in the market, whether that's on online or just trying to think of how to reinvent, take a new approach on a beer. Like, I think right now I'm kind of like my eyes are kind of looking at lagers and how do you use hops in a new way, like a new aromatic hops from New Zealand and Germany, and figure out how those might really, really shine in a lager format. For IPAs, I'm really pretty obsessed with figuring out what hops work, what hops don't work. I really just, it's like visually I see hops connecting in my head, and I just have to thoroughly document that. For IPAs,
we'll come back and unpack that in a little bit, because sure. I'm curious how you.
There's a lot there.
No, I mean, that's the interesting thing about talking to people about their creative process, like understanding the way that the kind of mental structures that people use to kind of build these things. It's fun to get into that.
But for the brewing development, we have 19 taps, and they're all very different beers. So that's when we're talking about chaos. It's just a lot of organizing. Yeah. Whether you have to manage if you have to maintain a lager strain and make sure it's not going to go to a tall size, and you're brewing a stout that week, you might have to cancel that stout so you can have some wort you can maintain that lager strain with that you're going to use the next week.
Well, in terms of developing recipes, as you develop the recipes for these beers, you mentioned that Julia brought, Belgian styles to the table. How do you work through those together? Or is it just hey, go brew it, and then, we'll see how it and talk about it and work through it after that? How does that creative piece of it work?
I mean, our process does tend to be kind of collaborative in that we'll often, we always work hazies and IPAs into our schedule, because we're known for that at this point, and so they're always going to be on tap. But then we also
we have rent to pay, so we need to work hazies in there.
Hey, for sure. You have customers to make happy. That's what you have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then we also like to look at what gaps do we have? What is going to be best for this season, or what are we going to be able to sell this time of year? What are people going to want right now? What do we not have that people really want right now? And as for me personally, I also like to kind of look at, let's see, let me look in our back catalog. I haven't seen us do much of this style before. I haven't seen us do this in a long time. I would like to try my hand at this. And generally speaking, if it works out scheduling wise, if it works out yeast wise, the folks here are very receptive to, Julia, go for it. Like when I got here, it's not that I don't like IPAs, just that I know IPAs are not my specialty. Phil here is definitely the Alpha King. But
he seems a little obsessive, obsessive about this. Yeah.
To very good ends,
for sure. We also got the medals to prove it.
In our company Slack, we also have a late night drinking channel. It's what are you drinking? Take a picture of it. Tell me, why do I like this? And so, if someone went to a bottle shop and picked up something that looked interesting, they might look at it and then they might do a little research. And in my case, hey, there was an article last week in Craft Beer and Brewing about this. Let me read the details. And then I'm texting these two guys and saying, hey, what do you think about this? What could we do? And then someone says, we've got a yeast that's similar that we're planning on using next month for that one. What if we did them both? One in a succession to make the yeast management easier, that sort of thing. We start talking that way. Or someone will chime in, I know I saw 11 pounds of that hop in the back of the freezer and I kind of want to use it up, so why don't we try that? That sort of thing. So
Yeah. I didn't pay you for those plugs, but I really appreciate that. And they did not go unnoticed. Let's talk a little bit about finding inspiration for these hoppy beers, where you go for that, and how you've built some hop understanding around here that clearly has reflected itself in crazy award-winning beers. Before we do that, the world of craft beer is a different place now Margins are more important than ever, so why not lower your ingredient cost? Craft juice concentrates from Old Orchard are the cost-effective solution for your fruit-forward needs. Old Orchard produces high volumes of their retail juice brand, so economies of scale keep prices low for their bulk supply program. A little concentrate goes a long way, and you won't lose some of it through filtering like you would with purees. To start increasing your margins now, head on over to www.oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, for years, Brewery DB has been the industry's only professionally curated source of brewery and beer information. In 2019, over 1 million brewery visits were made by craft fans searching for breweries on brewerydb.com. In just a few weeks, Brewery DB will unveil a all-new experience to help craft lovers get back on the brewery trail, to take full advantage of the enhanced marketing power of Brewery DB and increase your taproom traffic. Set up your account on marketmybrewery.com. That's marketmybrewery.com. It's easy and it's free. So, Phil, talk to me about that source of inspiration for the hoppy side of beers here. Clearly these are your babies, and clearly, they're responding. People are responding to them both locally and, of course, in awards. Where does that inspiration come from? What do you look to in order to help guide some of the, design and parameters that you build around some of these IPAs?
What's really done it for us is competitions.
Yeah.
Competitions really, you have to send your best. You're not trying to win third or fourth. You're trying to win, and you have to figure out, what were people doing last year. What are people doing now? You have to pay attention to that in February, and really look at what are people doing. What hops are they reusing, and get some practice brews in early in the year, and for that final batch, you're going full send. You're making a really expensive beer, so winning one award for fresh hop was really pivotal for us. It gave us all a little bit more faith that give us a bigger budget for hops.
What was that? That was the Washington Beer Awards, which is their local state competition, had their first ever fresh hop competition. And they had 7 or 8 categories of fresh hop, and we entered. We entered 2, I think, and one of them won a gold, which was our first gold, which was really validating. I think I recall you telling me a story, Phil, that while you were there, you overheard someone complaining about, you just put like a bunch of extra hops in just to win or something like that.
Yeah,
that's what I'm not trying to win third. That's why we're here, right?
Who enters a competition and isn't trying to win?
Right.
Yeah.
I think they thought I was cheating because I dry hopped or something. I was like, yeah, I dry hopped. Yep.
Anyways, that was our 2019.
But you got that taste. You got that taste of winning, and it became addictive.
Really, there was I really have to call out Scott Yanish for writing the new IPA.
Sure.
In early 2019, our beers were really nothing, pale in comparison to what they are now. And I read that book, and then I won that fresh hop. Then I won that medal for fresh hop. And then you look at 2020, and now I'm dry hopping by taste. So now I have a hands-on connection with the beer. So I have a crystal clear concept of this beer needs more Mosaic or a touch of Galaxy or Idaho. Yeah, I just our annual brewing schedule is kind of revolves around these competitions. As far as as soon as the cycle's over, it starts right back up thinking about, because right as soon as you're done with all this with a competition cycle, then you have the hops for that year coming out right in the next couple months. So you're already still thinking like, all right, what now? They're hops that haven't been out for 8 or 10 months are there, and you start planning like, okay, what are we going to be getting, and where are we going to be getting, how much, and how hard do we want to push?
Yeah,
we're fortunate to live so close to the hop fields here,
for sure,
and so that really enforces an extra seasonality on stuff. Like we can't just say, no, we're not making a fresh hop beer. Why would we do that? Because everyone in Seattle has come to expect it.
Right.
And we've come to like it too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you can only make them a certain time of year, and you can't say, I got room in the schedule in December to make the fresh hop beer, because it doesn't work, right?
Right.
And so that, like, working back from that, well, GABF is a little bit before that. If I want to make something for GABF, we got to make it in this time, and then there comes the fresh hop, and so there's there's a lot of stuff that's forced on you.
For sure. No, I did an entire episode with Matt Lincoln of Fremont talking only about brewing their fresh hop beers.
First fresh hop beers I had were his, yeah.
Absolutely, and so it's certainly that is a subject that can fill an entire episode just by itself. And if people want to listen to that one, just go listen to that episode, because it was a good one. But Phil, you mentioned when we were talking earlier that you visualize these hops in your head, and that you can just you can see them. That's fascinating to me. And I want you to tell me more about that.
I had synesthesia when I was younger. I don't now, but I still kind of draw on that. And I just...
synesthesia is when you see this as color, or...
Sort of.
Yeah.
Your brain's using different parts of different organs in the brain
right.
to do... so you're the part that thinks of music or color is kind of storing those thoughts in different ways. But yeah, usually when you have like, I would eat food and think of that as green, or listen to music, and I don't know. But anyways, with hops,
I do the same thing, and I will describe to Joe a beer in terms of color.
And it's a red beer, and it's like he's like, what?
Right. Like this beer is kind of moving, into this blue-green territory. And, it makes sense to me, because that's the way I just taste and see that. And, but that's interesting that you can relate to these kinds of flavors, how in that sense, in that kind of, mental way, or do specific hops have specific...
No, nothing like that. Just making connections between hops and the ratios, and it's really kicked in with directly tasting between dry hops, and being able to know that, just kind of have just know that it's going to, this beer it's good, but it really needs some Idaho 7 or Galaxy or
sure.
the next up.
Let's back up and talk about this kind of base, and we can kind of maybe work on West Coast IPA and then work on a hazy IPA, kind of on parallel trajectories there. Let's build from the base up, as you're building a, intense, rugged, very hoppy West Coast IPA that's going to win the Alpha King Challenge. What does the base for that look like in terms of grist and grain?
For the base malt, I need a really good performing pale ale malt, Pilsner, some chip malt, Carafoam. Make sure to balance the pH to 5.3 using acidulated malt. And that's where and then you're going to absolutely physically cram as much malt into the mash tun as possible.
Yeah.
And that's...
Are there specific, malts that you find yourself leaning towards because
Thomas Fawcett.
Thomas Fawcett?
Yeah. And then currently we're finding Canadian Superior Pils to perform pretty well on that. It's just for our particular system. We don't have a mill, so...
Phil, what was there was a malt that we can't get anymore that you really liked. It was the...
Thomas Fawcett Pils.
No, it was...
Oh, right. Full pint.
The full pint malt,
Yeah.
Our supplier stopped carrying it, and so we're sad. But
well, they just couldn't get the contract on it. I don't think you can get it anywhere in the world. I don't think the maltsters could get it at an affordable price.
Yeah. And so you don't mill here, and so you have it pre-milled then?
Yeah.
We have it pre-milled. We have a project on our list to install a mill.
Yeah.
We already basically have it purchased, but we have so little space that they're asking us, well, how do you want to do the auger? And I'm like, I don't know anything about that. So we need to find someone who can help us figure out how to cram this thing in here.
Sure.
So getting back to the build, for IPAs, I just like Chico. For West Coast, I like Chico.
Sure.
And for hazies, I stick with London Fog.
Yeah.
London Fog can top crop very, very easily. So we will pitch our yeast, take that pitch line and hook that up to the CIP arm, and then make sure to put the fermenter's blow-off hose in from the yeast brink into airlock. And so the yeast brink now is going to collect all the krausen from the brew. And but if something goes wrong, you don't have krausen, then you're going to have to burp the tank to get some of that, to capture some of that krausen.
Right.
For West Coast, the bitterness bitterness just isn't what it used to be. I will never do a large 60-minute kettle edition. I'm more focused on what performs in mid-boil hops.
Right.
And I think Warrior just absolutely shines.
Yeah.
It's has a nice citrusy resinous character.
And I think you're right. That's the key on some of that. If it's going to be big in bitterness, the quality of the bitterness and the kind of depth and complexity of that bitter flavor
really think
matters
about
and
it.
Sets these beers apart.
Yeah, you really got to think about it, and what hops really truly shine. Mid-boil, Chinook, Strata's good one. Well, that's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, yeah.
For hazies, I like to throw a little anti-foam hops at first boil. Maybe anywhere from 5 to 10 IBUs worth. I think it really helps the hops shine. I don't really know the science behind it. I just seen it.
Sure.
I've just seen that work, and then I'm kind of toying with doing 3 to 5 minute additions, and then with our system, we're physically limited to about 12 pounds per in the that we can add total in the kettle. So I tend to find myself restrained that way. Like, how can we physically cram more hops into the kettle? I say that all the time. So we're looking at cryo hops or Lupamax or any of the products out there, and they have to be used. Very well. You have to do your homework, and they have to be used in the right way. Like, if you use all hop oil, then it can come with a really harsh bitterness like a harsh character. But when you all use them all in balance, then you can get physically cram more in the kettle. And then for dry hopping, you have a similar problem. I mean, yield becomes a problem where every pound of pellets you add absorbs about 0.7 gallons of wort. So when we're dry hopping 20, 30 pounds into our batch, it means we're going to have a lot less product.
And you're brewing on a relatively smaller scale already, and so losing more beer through that process is not an exciting prospect.
And when most of the beer sells by the pint, you're talking hundreds, thousands of dollars. So you really want to. That's kind of my research is there right now on how we can improve our yield and have the beer as hoppy as possible.
Yeah, sometimes Phil will come to me and say, "I want to try this new product, cryo type product. Let's try it out." And it's whatever, $30 a pound, $45 a pound. And I'm like, how much you want of that? That's pretty expensive. He's like, well, I think I'll get another barrel out of the batch. I'm like, okay, let's try it, by all means.
Sure. They don't make micro centrifuges for breweries your size.
But I wouldn't use it.
No.
I know I'd lose the aromatics. You got to do everything possible to keep the aromatics in that beer, down to every single step. I dumped the cone after one day because after 24 hours, we've extracted the majority of the aromatics that we need. With carbonate, when we carbonate, so we're transferring beer from 33 degree beer into a bright tank that's 40 degrees. So the headspace of that fermenter is going to chill while you're carbonating. I carbonate overnight. And so that means that as the pressure increases during carbonation, some of that CO2 is going to be traveling entirely through the beer into the headspace, carrying the aromatics with it. So I make sure to put CO2 on the CIP arm to make sure that the head pressure doesn't drop from that loss of the reduction in pressure.
So you are really trying to keep every aromatic element right into that liquid.
Paid a whole lot for it.
Right. That's some dogged determination, and obviously it's bearing some good results for you. Let's talk about hops themselves. you clearly, think about hops and have these mental pictures of hops. As you're building hop, and you're also paying attention to hops that other brewers are using, how they're using them, and the interesting effects that those things can have. Let's talk a little bit about some of those hop combinations that speak to you, that you find yourself really enjoying moving into your beers.
I cannot see doing an IPA without Mosaic.
Yeah,
I think Citra plays along in there
sure,
extremely well. That's obvious. And I'm really liking Idaho 7's made its way into nearly all our beers. I see Idaho and Galaxy play really well together, particularly with Mosaic.
What do you like about Idaho 7?
It's just a absolutely incredible booster hop. But if you use too much of it, it comes with a harsh bitterness in the back of the palate. So in the whirlpool, I'll tend to do about 3-to-1 ratio of Citra to Idaho, because you'll get that harsh bite at the back of the palate. And with the it's even the same thing with dry hops. But man, you take Citra and Mosaic together, and they just amplify each other. And, and Idaho comes in there, just a little touch of it, or a little touch of Galaxy, and it just gets boosted so much higher. Interesting.
When you say boosted, what do you think it does? Is it just
visually? I think of the hop aromatic as a like a bell curve, or half the side of a bell curve, and on the end of it you have. If you want to go out to the fourth or fifth standard deviation, you've got thousands and thousands of subsensory threshold hop aromatic compounds that just aren't there. And so if you had you started with Mosaic and you had a touch of Idaho or a touch of Citra, those subsensory thresholds are together become past that threshold. And it's not one or two compounds, it's thousands upon thousands. It's really hard to nail down specifically what's happening. It's more of an artistic process.
So you can use a mixture of different hops to enhance those way out on the curve compounds without enhancing the stuff that's in the middle that would then dominate the palate.
Right.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are there other hops that you find do the same? We have talked about that in the past as I've called them everything from point guard hops. They're not scoring, but they're setting up the scoring play. Are there other hops in Idaho 7 and Galaxy you just mentioned that help bring out interesting or nice characters in some of those leading role hops?
I think there's about 5 main. For me, we have 5 main hops: Citra, Mosaic. It's everything in Hopotheosis. Citra, Mosaic, Idaho, Strata, Galaxy. And then everything else I think of as a booster hop. And it has that, they're all going to have that little caveat where you use too much of it and you're going to get that harsh back of the palate bitterness. And once that's in there, you can't get it out.
Yeah.
So we have a 3-way. We have some stainless we have some stainless mini growlers. And so we'll take we'll get a base beer from either here or a neighboring brewery that is only Citra, only Mosaic, and then we'll fill those 3 growlers with that beer, and then dose at a rate equivalent to 2 pounds per barrel, and it's a really affordable and cheap way to figure out what those next hops are. I really have my eyes on Vic's Secret, the connection between Nelson and Mosaic and Galaxy, and my interest is picked in Brew One if I can find it. Mm-hmm. There's so many new experimental hops out there that it's just, there's 100. Well, there's probably 40 or 50 to go through.
This is going to sound kind of weird, but I want to put in a plug for another brewery that is in Yakima named Single Hill.
Sure.
Super nice guys.
Yeah.
And they're right there in the hop fields. And they do this fun series of beers where they have they make the same base beer, and then they have a 15 barrel system, right?
This is the Outcross series
The
that
Outcross
you're about
series,
to talk
exactly.
about. Sure,
Yeah.
sure. It's Zach, right?
Zach is one of their brewers and owners. Yeah.
And he was just emailing me about this
okay.
this week and sent me samples of the 3 different Outcross beers.
Great.
Yeah.
So for your listeners, like they take the same base beer. They have 3 5-barrel fermenters, and they will take that same base beer and dry hop with a different, interesting experimental hop for each one, and then they decide to put that out as a 3-pack of cans, so you can try each thing.
Right.
And every time I come out with a new one, I order a couple of 3-packs because it's so much fun.
Right.
And they have numbers. Like, did you like the 1038? Did you like the 642? I'm making up those numbers, but
right.
It's just it's so cool to see that kind of experimentation.
It's amazing to see that kind of leadership in the industry of somebody taking those risks and really doing a lot of the hard work for us.
Right.
So now these are hops that we might not even be able to get. And now these guys are, right there. They're subject matter experts on new experimental hops, and they can get them.
Right.
So you get to see what works, what doesn't work, and where they had one hop in the last Outcross where they're really excited about it, and Julia and I tasted it, and I'm like, no, that hop belongs in a lager. Like, that'll be new cutting edge lager. And Julia's like, no, that should be in a saison. And so I'm like, okay, I'll brew the lager, you brew the saison.
I do really want that one in a saison. Just that particular one we were talking about.
Yeah, and there's no reason it can't work for both. That's really fun. So, from your standpoint then, evaluating hops, you are a small brewery. You're not doing huge, thousands and thousands of barrels of beer per year. Contracts have to be, a difficult thing to pull off at this kind of scale.
Yeah.
Talk to me about getting quality hops and evaluating, each of those bags of hops as they come into the brewery, so that you are putting in the quality of hop that you want to make the beer that you want to make. Clearly, we've had this conversation a whole bunch of times, and there are brewers that'll tell me you have to select, and we have, the magic in our beer is because we're able to pick exactly the hops we want.
Right.
You don't have that luxury, and yet, or at least on a large scale, but yet you just make these award-winning beers. And so I'm curious, what is that process when these ingredients come in, how you think about and evaluate and, can figure out how to, adjust potentially if something is a little, not exactly the way you expect it to be as it comes in. Talk to me a little bit about that process.
I don't see myself doing hop selections. I'm not saying they don't work. I think the hop chemistry is a much more complicated thing than it was maybe back in 10 years ago when we were making the era of 200 IBU West Coast IPAs. You could do a hop rubbing of Cascade or Chinook, and I think that's fairly accurately that'll fairly accurately translate into what the IPA will taste like. And the hops now, the compounds don't. If you smell a bag of Galaxy, to me it smells like old Hallertau. And I would never guess that a little bit of that would do so much to an IPA. And for, basic quality control, I just haven't really observed, that much variance in the quality of hops coming through.
Huh.
After winning the awards, it was easy to make a compelling argument that we need a contract. Because of the volatility that we observed in the market back in 2019, we were paying £25 for Citra.
Right.
That's crippling. You can't do much with it. No, you can't use £6 per barrel of that.
Right.
So you're able to contract with a reputable supplier where the quality is just not really going to be a huge issue.
Right.
When we have encountered, what I've seen is there'd be bad years. Maybe a bad year for Galaxy that happened, but I haven't seen too much variance from one supplier to the next. I tend to prefer some of the bigger guys, just because I think they're doing a lot of that hard work for me. Maybe there's you get occasional. I do now. When we received every box, I inspect every single bag. Make sure it passes. It's holding pressure.
Right.
Because if it's had a tear, who knows how many years ago that happened.
Right.
Yeah. I think that the people who are doing the hop selection, I can totally see why they're doing it. If it's, we're making 60 barrels of this exact beer twice a week, putting it in cans. It has to be shelf stable for 3 months. And we don't want someone to notice a difference in the taste from April to May.
Right.
We're just not at that scale, of course. I think we made 280 barrels of beer last year.
Yeah.
I'd love it if we made 400 barrels this year. But we're not going to do that. Right. And so I can totally see how, if you've got your process that refined, to where you can pull off what some of the big guys are pulling off, maybe it matters. Hey, the myrcene in this one was this percent, but the myrcene in that batch was that percent. And my target is this. And so I'm big enough to afford some GCMS on my finished beer. And I know that this is what we need. So I'm going to select that batch. I'm like, yeah, you're sciencing that. And that's great. We're not at the scale where we could afford to, it might be fun. But yeah,
and there's no need to do it because your customers, it's not going to translate into some experience for them that is any markedly better. I am convinced that a fair number of brewers go to hop selection because it's a great excuse to go hang out with their friends and go drink some beers in Yakima.
I'm glad you said that because it's what I wanted to say.
But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I think at this point of after this past year of COVID, we're all dying to get out and spend time with each other and
we
enjoy
recently took a trip to Yakima to hang out, and we were hearing stories about the hop selection, and I was thinking, geez, I want to do that, but I don't have a good excuse to do it. I'll just make one up.
Yeah. It is a fun time, that selection period, that and the harvest time. Like, it's just fun to be there. And if you're engaged in this kind of thing and making beer like this,
and it is, Eastern Washington is a beautiful part of the world.
It is.
All of us owners grew up in Eastern Washington, and going back there is always kind of nostalgic.
Yeah. I'm hoping to get back this year, either for Harvest or for the Fresh Hop Festival, just to get back into it. Because
for sure,
right. And that connection between the agriculture and the beer is so important, and it's so necessary to give hops growers and that agricultural side of it the credit that they deserve for this era of incredibly creative craft beer that we're in. And so that's a fun piece. But let's talk a little bit more about brewing. Let's talk about that fermentation side, and dry hopping strategy with your IPAs. You mentioned, the yeast that you use. What is, but dry hopping and how you do it and when you do it and what temperatures you do it at, are all things that vary from brewer to brewer. Talk to me a little bit about that strategy for you all.
We have 8-foot ceilings, and the tanks are about a foot and a half from the top of the ceiling. So we don't really have the luxury of using a hop doser. So we wait till the beer passes a VDK, and then we'll do a dry hop, dump the cone, do another dry hop, dump the cone, and then we'll taste it. Does it need more hops? If so, you dry hop it and dump the cone.
How long
dump the cone 24 hours later.
Oh, so 24 hours on the hops, and then you dump it.
Yeah. So what a lot of breweries right now are doing is they wait till the beers passes VDK, and you then you crash the tank down to 58 or maybe 52 degrees. You add a hop doser on top of the fermenter, which, if anybody doesn't know, is kind of it's like a mini fermenter where it has a cylinder and a cone, and it has a port on the bottom where you can purge that vessel with CO2, and now you add those hops in. So once fermentation's done, you don't want any oxygen getting into the beer, particularly if you're dry hopping cold. So that's why they use the hop doser. And then we'll do one large dry hop, and then dump the cone some hours later. And can't do that here. We don't have the ceiling height. So I just work with what I got, and we dry hop at 72 degrees. I'm sure we lose some aromatics doing that. Not 68 to 70 degrees. And then dump the cone the day after. But the critical part for me is tasting it. Noting any batch differences. What if one batch, like this last batch of Hopotheosis and Hop Spleener, just really shine, and we're like, all night. Like, I have like a laser focus on figuring out what particularly happened on that batch. Was it this new process where we're using cryo hops that would increase the volume? Does that impact how the flavor's getting into the beer? Or I don't know. I'm still looking into it.
I love that amount of fixation that you apply to this.
I'm anti-consistency. If you keep making the same, you keep drinking the same, your favorite beer day after day, well, every couple of days, year after year, eventually your palate fatigues and you just get kind of bored and you want to try something else. And also then when you're pro consistency, in my opinion, you're anti-advancement. You're not I want to continuously improve the beer batch after batch, figure out what didn't work, what does work, and figure out, what products are out there that we can, again, physically cram more hops into the beer while being able to pay rent here.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit more about that. But first, the founders launched SS Brewtech with a very clear goal to advance brewing equipment design, performance, and quality to the very highest standards in the industry, with a team that draws upon strong functional backgrounds in brewing science, mechanical engineering, industrial design, supply chain, and manufacturing. SS Brewtech has the people and skill sets you'd want and expect from your supplier of pro brewing equipment. Head over to ssbrewtech.com for more information on their brew houses and brewing gear. Also, food-grade lubricants are not your top concern. Your beer is. Lucky for you, Clarion has a passion for protecting your beer by helping to make your brewing system 100% food safe. When you switch to Clarion food-grade lubricants, you are reducing the risk of costly contamination and recalls to virtually zero, all while extending the life of your equipment. And that leaves you with peace of mind to think about what really matters. Go to clarionlubricants.com to learn more. Well, we've been talking a lot about hoppy beers, but like we said at the top, you proudly display that catchphrase on your website, IPA in the streets and lager in the sheets. So let's talk a little bit about some of that, that kind of passionate approach to the beers that you love to make. We've now got some Czech dark lager in front of us. And Julia, talk to me a little bit. You're heading up the kind of non-hoppy beers. We let Phil focus on the hoppy beers, and you are working on some of these other beers. Talk to me a little bit about the kind of the way that you focus on lagers for Burke-Gilman.
For me, lagers are some of my favorite styles to brew because they pose a lot of challenge that other beers don't always pose, because they can be so finicky in terms of yeast management, in terms of aging, to get it as clean and clear as possible.
You can't hide anything in a lager.
Of course, right.
Yeah, exactly. You can, but do you want to? And obviously we don't. Right.
What do the parameters of the lager program look like? Do you find yourself going back to a subset of this? I mean, the lager world is really broad.
Right. Let me give a little history.
Sure.
So when we planned out our brewery, our focus was definitely on being an ale brewery. The craft lager movement hadn't really taken root yet. We intended to open at the beginning of summer 2018, and then of course construction delays. We wound up opening towards the end of summer 2018. And so we built a little bit of an audience, but then winter happened. And winter's kind of a cold, gray place in Seattle. And of course, sales were not what we thought they would be. So we had extra time. And so we said to Phil, let's brew a lager. Why not? We got time in the tank.
Right.
So Phil thought about it. We made a couple of iterations, and we wound up making a Vienna lager that really hit the spot with our customers. Enough that when we intended it to be a one-off batch. And then when we ran out, people were like, can I have more of that Vienna lager? I guess we better make it again. Now it's become one of our standards.
Yeah.
I think we're on batch 9 or 10 or something like that now. And so that's one of our regulars. We have another regular lager that we make, which resulted from a gentleman in the neighborhood who would walk past on his daily walks with his friend, and he would smell the beer brewing, smell the mash, that cracker smell. And he would always, give a little victory sign at Phil, sort of shake his fist. And one day Phil said, what are you doing? Come on in here and talk to me. And it turns out he is the former assistant brewer at a large local brewery.
Oh.
They got to talking, and after a few visits and a few beers, Phil got something of a recipe out of him. We figured it out. And so we made our impression of what this beer must have tasted like in the 60s.
Interesting.
Again, we intended it as a one-off batch, and people went nuts. People were like, "This is a great beer," and so the basics are like we would like to keep rotating and making interesting other things, like the Czech Dark Lager. Like we recently had a Munich Helles on. We have a million ideas for other stuff to make. Can we do that and rotate it with these other 2 regular beers that we have, so that people have a reasonable expectation of finding what they want? It turns out we misjudged our audience. We thought, oh, hazies and West Coast IPAs, it's hoppy beers, it's what everybody wants. And of course they do, but we have a lot of neighbors who, once they found out we had a craft lager on, their reaction was, oh my God, a beer with no hops. This is great. Finally some beer, right? And so we had no choice but to keep trying to make that sort of thing. And so our original intention was not to be a lager brewery, but I think honestly, the 4 of us founders, we're not really all that into lager when we started, and now we're like, let's make more of that. Let's do more of this. Julia started right at the beginning of the year this year, and I don't know, it was like your first week here or something like that, and she texted me and said, "Hey, I've been looking at the brew schedule and I noticed there's a gap. What do you think about a Czech Dark Lager?" And I was like, "Well, what do you think about a Czech Dark Lager? Let's try it." And so this was actually the first recipe she designed for us. It was actually maybe the 3rd or 4th beer of hers that we came out with because it had to age for so long. But we're just delighted. It's just a delightful beer.
Sure.
So with that historical intro, I want to hand it off to Julia to talk about the way she thought about it, right?
Yeah. Talk to me. I mean, so you come up with the idea, like, let's brew a Czech Dark Lager. Where do you go for inspiration on that? And how'd you go about building a recipe?
For inspiration, I often go back to a lot of, like, where have I had this beer before that I've really loved it? What breweries are known for this style? And I kind of use that as a jumping off point for research. And I found out that there's a particular Czech brewery in Czech Republic. I forget exactly which one it is, but they basically kind of revived the style, and they went a great deal into their process as well. And I was like, okay, this all looks good. I'm going to tweak this and this and this thing, and develop the recipe based on that. The other thing, one big thing that I've learned here at Burke-Gilman that I haven't seen done at a lot of other breweries is a very gradual step crashing, especially with lagers.
Right.
Most other breweries I've worked at, it's been like, okay, you have fermentation temperature, you have diacetyl rest, you might have lagering temperatures, and then you crash it down to 33 degrees. But Phil introduced me to much more gradual step crashes, like, okay, we can go down to, say, 55, we can go down to 50 or 48, kind of very gradually give the yeast a chance to clean up after itself while kind of calming it down to the point like the beer is as clean and well lagered as possible before actually crashing it to cold condition temperatures. Other places I've worked at, our lagers here stay in the tanks longer than any other place I've worked at. Our lagers stay in our fermenters for 8 weeks before going to the cold room. And that, I think, is one thing that actually really makes our lagers shine, is to give it as much time as it needs, rather than trying to rush it.
Sure.
I mean, obviously in the brewing game, it's like, you can always try and shuffle more beer through, or you can do it exactly right and really let it shine, and then be able to attract people by saying, hey, look, we have this really exceptional beer that people will come and will drink and will pay for.
Right.
Yeah. And honestly, that was a little bit of an accidental discovery on our part. We have had plenty of times where, the Vienna lager has been in the tank 5 weeks. Everyone's asking for it. Can we try it? Can we try it? Well, I want to wait till 6 weeks because we were thinking 6 weeks was our thing. And then we tried it. And then at one point, I don't know, Phil was out sick or something didn't get transferred or whatever. And now, hey, this batch is 8 weeks old. And everyone's like, this is so much better. Oh,
right.
I wonder what happened here. And so we sort of settled on, like, if we can, let's try to target 8 weeks for our lagers. We have friends who do them 12 weeks at other breweries, which who knows? If we could afford to leave them in 12 weeks, maybe they'd be that much better. Who knows?
Yeah. Are there other lager styles that you've found really resonate, with the customers, and that you've enjoyed brewing?
The Vienna lager, I've always had a huge soft spot for Vienna lagers everywhere I've gone. There's not a style of beer I don't love in some way or another, but I have a particular soft spot for malty lagers like that. And Vienna lager, until, say, the last 5 years or so, I feel has kind of been a neglected style. And to see one...
Yeah, it's been dominated by one brand from one company. Well, I shouldn't say that. They're more than one. But, it's Sam Adams Boston Lager is the Vienna lager that, everybody in craft knows and, can embrace. And so it becomes that kind of touchstone for folks. But it's also, because it's familiar, people may not realize that they love Vienna or they enjoy Vienna lager as much as they do. Yeah. Let's as we're getting towards the end here, let's zoom out a little bit. 2020 was clearly an amazing year for Burke-Gilman, a difficult year for the brewery as it was for all breweries, trying to adapt and respond to COVID closures and the pandemic. But certainly amazing high points at the end of last year. What does the immediate future look like for Burke-Gilman? And then what is the ultimate long-term goal? What's the big vision, and what do you hope to achieve, in the years to come?
So our immediate goal is, honestly, we've been so focused on the pandemic and how we respond to that, because we can't be a crowded, happy neighborhood tap room right now. With the announcements very recently, we can kind of see how that might happen, in the near future, which is great.
Everybody get vaccinated so we can all get back to tap rooms.
Everyone, please get vaccinated. I think our immediate goal is actually, it ties in with something Phil was messaging me about just this morning, saying, you know what? We might have bar seating again for the first time in a year and a half in like 6 weeks. We're going to need to make a ton of hoppy beers. There's Phil with the hoppy beers again.
Right.
And what if we buy all those hops now before the price goes up? And so he sent me a list of many thousands of dollars worth of hops. But I was like, this is a pretty good idea, actually. Okay, let me sit down and look at this. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's our immediate goal, is figure out how to navigate this change. The same way we navigated the change of shutdown. Now we're going to navigate the change of opening up. Figure out how to do that and continue to supply our customers. It's likely we won't be sending out a lot of kegs or cans during the summer because we can sell them all here, which is great.
Right.
But we also want to keep those accounts happy because they were very good to us and they helped us survive during the pandemic.
Sure.
Long term, I think I was saying earlier, we made something like 280 barrels last year. I would love to, through better utilization and maybe some expansions in equipment, if we can fit them in those 8-foot ceilings, as Phil points out, expand to 700, something like that. I could see us going to 1,000 maybe, but I can't see us getting beyond that without moving, right?
Right.
And so the more we can sell on site, the more we are fulfilling our core mission of being a friendly neighborhood joint. I personally would love it if when people who really know beer, or people who really appreciate beer, are talking about, well, where do you want to go in Seattle? Like if we're one of those top breweries they mentioned, like, oh, I never heard of those guys. I've never seen them on Taver. I don't know who they are, right? And that the real beer heads are like, listen, you gotta go to Burke-Gilman. Just trust me. Just go. Right. I think that's my ultimate goal. I think I share that with all my partners.
And you're doing that and building this destination in a way that also doesn't alienate your local neighborhood audience.
Exactly.
That I imagine really enjoys having a brewery that has those kinds of accolades and is brewing that quality of beer and primarily serving them.
Yeah, I think from a pure business sense, it would make a lot of sense with these big awards to say, listen, we need to rent a warehouse somewhere, we need to scale up, we need to get this in cans, we need to get this in bottle shops all up and down the coast. And honestly, all of us partners look at that and say, that probably makes sense, but I wanted to open a neighborhood joint. This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
So we're just going to be a neighborhood joint where you happen to be able to get some of the best beer in Washington. So that's cool.
And as beer geeks, you get to enjoy it yourselves too.
Exactly.
Yeah. Phil, what are your goals?
Man, if you told me a couple of years ago I was going to win JBF and Alpha King, I would just walk away.
Sure.
Right now I need to make sure these guys we can recover financially from 2020.
Right.
And for me, it's been just absolutely stunning and eye-opening, the transformative change that happens, all the doors that open for you when you win big. And a year ago, I remember telling Ken, I could see where our beer was going. I knew it had potential. And I have this test I do when we're talking about the quality of the beer, and I say, just imagine somebody hands you this beer and says it won GABF Gold. Would you believe it or not? And as long as it's like, well, yeah, maybe, then we should send it. And they're like, GABF, you're crazy. What are you talking about? Alpha King, are you out of your mind? So, and I'm like, there's 8,000 breweries in the United States, and you mean to tell me that only 180 of them think they had a chance? I'll take that odds any day. So, I like competitions. I want to keep. That's really been really motivating, really rewarding. It really hones your craft. It really forces you to study, do the research, do the R&D. None of this would have happened unless I had paid time to do R&D. A lot of it. So for years out, we can only expand so far without the quality going down. I'm extremely quality focused. That's kind of the whole point with entering competitions, is that your quality, you really have a laser focus on quality. And then when I'm stretched to my limits, we hire somebody, not an assistant brewer, somebody with a relatively equal amount of, time with boots on the ground that is going to have a completely different perspective than I am. And you get I hate to use the word synergy, but that's exactly what you get.
Sure.
So, and now where before I would do anything I could to avoid working 2 consecutive brew days in a row because something will go wrong. You're tired, cranky. Now I need literally a third of that energy level. And so now Julie and I, we just split up the brew days on who's leading that, and who's playing the supporting role. But years out, more fresh hop beers, more hoppier beers, more experimental hops. Once we figure out which key hops we're focusing on. And just regionally, I really hope there's such a competitive edge with entering fresh hop beers into in particular the Alpha King competition. And I really hope to see the Northwest dominate in that competition. It doesn't have to be me. That'd be great, but it's there's only 21 Alpha Kings, and I'd hope to see some more Washington brewers do it.
Sure. Julia, what's the next beer style that you're really excited to brew?
Well, actually, for Pride Month, I'm going to be brewing just an old school American IPA, which is, I feel like with all the hazies and all the West Coast coming out, that's a style that just hasn't gotten a lot of love lately, and I like to see where kind of the gaps are, what styles are not kind of getting the limelight that they used to get or that I feel they deserve, and go like, I kind of want to do this again. So something old school American, like 5% pale ale with a lot of C hops in it. Probably more C hops, more of the hops than you would probably see in an average pale ale, because we are Burke-Gilman. But yeah, like
I want expectations to fulfill.
Exactly.
It's mandatory.
I signed a contract on my first day on the job.
Yeah.
You will dry hop with no fewer than 4 pounds per barrel. But no, I have that. I'm going to be working on that pale ale. I'm going to be brewing a Kolsch for the summertime, which I love super simple summer crushers like that. And again, like lagers like that can be super big challenges because super simple, nowhere to hide, but you still want to have them as clean and refined as possible. Right. And I'm very much a process nerd when it comes to beer, and to be able to see, like Phil said, we both have a lot of experience in this industry, but every new brewery that you go to is always a learning opportunity to see what other people do, what other people's processes are. And I have already learned an incredible amount from working with Phil. Because, exceptional. He makes exceptional beer, and I just want to keep making exceptional beer alongside him for Burke-Gilman.
You're doing good.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. G&D Chillers is the brewing industry's premier choice for glycol chilling. Set your compass by Raw North Star Pills. Benefit from the scale of Old Orchard. Set up your account on marketmybrewery.com today. SS Brewtech is advancing brewing equipment design, performance, and quality, and gain peace of mind with Clarion lubricants. Of course, if you'd like to support this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com and click on the subscribe button. If you're a pro brewer, consider our all access pro subscriptions that combine both of the magazines with exclusive online content and more. And, maybe if you read the magazine, you'll be inspired to brew that next beer style, right, Kenneth?
I strongly recommend the all access subscription. It's a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for that. We appreciate that. If people want to learn more about Burke-Gilman or drink the beer in real life or find out, follow you on the internet, where do they find you?
So we have, I think we're on Instagram at burkebrewing. Just Burke Brewing. I think this is the same for Facebook. I think it's the same for Twitter. I actually can't remember. One of them is Burke-Gilman Brewing. The other two are Burke Brewing. Or just go to burke-gilmanbrewing.com and we got links to all of them. Yeah.
Sure. Well, thank you all for joining me on the podcast today. It's been fun to kind of dive into that winning mentality. And, 2020 was a pretty fantastic year in terms of awards and recognition for you all. And I hope that 2021 and 2022 and 2023 are similarly fruitful in a variety of ways.
Even if there are no awards, we're going to have people in a tap room, elbow to elbow, drinking beer, having fun together, having conversations. And I think it's going to be outstanding in that way, no matter what happens with awards. So get your vaccination.
I will drink to that. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.